All right, good afternoon and welcome in, everybody. Master Sergeant Parson, the Sergeant at Arms for our top three. This afternoon, we've got a great presenter, Chief Master Sergeant Zackery, who's at United States Special Operations Command as the Comprehensive Review Implementation Team Senior Enlisted Advisor. So, Chief, welcome in. If you would, tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us your story, and then we'll roll into our discussion and then follow up with some questions. So, over to you, Chief.
Yeah, absolutely. Bear with me. It has camera issues, as you can see. All right, you think it's my first VTC, but thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys taking the time and spending it with me. Got the opportunity to work with the recruiting service last year up in Boston, and that was awesome. So thanks for having me back. We do have a short time to talk about a very complex and vast topic. I would say I'm not an expert, but I do have a few years of experience, so I want to share some of that with you. So the ORE, I'll talk about my current position, just a little bit about me because you saw my bio already. But we're going to talk about how that relates to culture, the Air Force culture, and how that relates to us as airmen. And then I'll answer one or two questions that I saw, and then I will turn it over to the team to facilitate the other questions. So a little bit, I'm a SOCOM, so Special Operations Command. It's a combatant command. We have about 80,000 people around the world. You guys all familiar with what SOCOM does? Put warheads and foreheads and kick in doors and some other things around the globe. As far as CRIT, well, it was called a comprehensive review. And what does that mean? We had to look internally as we look at our force governance and some issues we're having with our ethics and culture as a special operations unit, and that's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. And so we have to address those things as how it relate to our force and family. We're having suicides, crimes, things along that nature. So we'll have the comprehensive review. It's in the National Defense Authorization Act. And so we are beholden to Congress for answers and updates as we look internally to make ourselves better. And we broke that out into force governance, press and engage leaders, connecting back to the force, and then also communication. You saw my bio, I'm a TACP by trade, so a special operator. Been joint my whole career, had a stance as command chief, and now I'm here. So that's enough of that. We're not here to talk about me, here to talk about you and the questions that you guys have. So I'll break there for any questions.
All right, Chief, if you're good, I'm going to start off with the ones that we kind of sent you that we gathered ahead of time. So obviously the special warfare combat support world is a must-win environment, similar to recruiting, and culture is critical to that. How have you seen that winning culture reinforced?
Well, I would say, I'll answer the question, I'll back up a little bit. I would say a culture is based on the mission, right? So winning culture is the willingness to sacrifice everything for something. So what is that something? Is it each other? Is it recognition? Or is it a Super Bowl trophy? Is it to, make it out of a valley alive? It's an idea, if you will. I'll offer our flag as a culture, right? A philosopher said, the reason why someone pulls a trigger is more powerful and also could be more destructive than the bullet itself. Napoleon also said a soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. So what's that colored ribbon? Is that our rank that we wear? It's the oak leaf clusters, the generals' stars, or those pretty, ribbon racks we have on our chest, right? Think about some of the things we do, long hours we work, things we sacrifice from our family for that next strike, for that next rank, for that recognition. So magnify that on the battlefield. So to answer your question, winning culture, you have to be tied to something, right? Tied to the mission, tied to each other, sense of belief in something to go forward and i.e. face the enemy, speak truth to power, or sacrifice your life for something. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, Chief. Perfect answer. Appreciate that.
Also, let me expound a little bit more. So we talk about culture, and we use a lot of words, and I'll go through a little spiel here, but we use a lot of words like, what is culture? How do we define that? And I'll offer, we never define words. The dictionary describe words. That's why you have so many meanings for different words. That's why we have so many issues. We talk about culture, misunderstandings, people not getting along. It's because words are not defined, they're described, and they mean different things to different people. So we talk about culture. It could be a way of life. It could be customs. It could be habits. It could be, what we value. So the answer to that is it depends. So as leaders, we can't tell each other, or we shouldn't tell each other what to think. I think that's basic leadership at best. But I will offer, as we talk to each other, we describe how to think, how to put different frames on complex situations. And so when you guys say, hey, let's talk about Air Force culture, I'm like, man, that's huge. Like, that's so smart people will take weeks to talk about that, and we still won't get it right. And so we have 1 hour to try to talk about that a little bit. So I'll frame it in this, we look at ourselves as humans, right? Air Force leaders and tradesmen or tacticians, right? So as humans, it's very simple, but apparently it's hard to do. As humans, treat humans like humans, right? Dignity and respect. Very simple principles, but a lot of times in and out the military, it's hard to do. So I'll offer you cannot be a great leader if you're not a good person. And I define great leader by doing great things, so not evil. There are some very effective leaders out there that were evil. I wouldn't put them in the great category. I said they're effective leaders. So back to my statement, you cannot be a great leader if you're not a good person, in my opinion. Go to the second portion of Air Force leaders. I see a lot of people on Facebook with leadership pods, and I'm not dogging it. Good on them, continue to lead. But as individuals, we have to be careful who we listen to, because a lot of people do a lot of talking, but may not amount to a lot of things. And let me describe it a little bit more. Do we know the narrative or the formula? What I mean by that, Coca-Cola. We all know Coca-Cola and Pepsi products, but Coca-Cola, Coke is it, right? Or Enjoy, or those polar bear commercials where the polar bears are drinking Coca-Cola. We all know the narrative, but do we know the formula? What is Coca-Cola made out of? We don't know, but we know the narrative. So I equate that to us as the Air Force unit. We all understand fly, fight, and win, air power, all these slogans that we say quite often, but do we know the formula? What is air power? How does it relate past our individual AFSCs and now collectively as the recruiting service, your ability to recruit young men and women to come into the Air Force? Past those two things, what is the Air Force about? What is air power? So we looked at General Brown. He said, accelerate, change, or lose. 4 categories: airmen, bureaucracy, competition, design. Airmen, attributes, right? Talent management. But how can we manage talent if we don't or haven't defined talent? I will find it hard pressed anyone on the screen right now say, hey, to have a talented future chief, command chief, to lead recruiting services, Goldstrom, what talent does he need to come up through each rank? We can have some generic things like do this and do that, and leadership and be present, engaged, and all these buzzwords, but have we really defined what talent is? If we haven't defined it, how can we manage it? Part 2 are bureaucracy, innovation, right? How do we get past ourselves to be competent? Competition is one of the General Brown's accelerate, change, or lose. But what is competition? Who are our strategic competitors? I can see people on the screen here. I'm not going to call them out by name, but say, hey, who's our strategic competitor and what we compete in competition with, right? And then design and adapt, right? And then lastly, I'll say, as far as knowing the formula versus just knowing the narrative, what would happen if I called on someone to say, hey, what are the core missions of the Air Force? Probably be a lot of silence, correct? So if we don't know the core missions of the Air Force by name, but then it cannot further understand or articulate the importance of the core missions of the Air Force, how can we relate that to the airmen besides the buzzwords of fly, fight, and win and air power? Back to the original point, do we know the narrative only, or do we also know the formula? And then as far as our tactician and recruiting specific skills, your recruiting skills should be connected to, one, being a great human, and two, being a great leader. And all for being a great leader is understanding what the Air Force is about. And I'll pause there, Sergeant Parson.
All right, Chief. Thank you. That's a lot to unpack. So I'm gonna do my best to do it systematically based on kind of what you've covered so far. One thing that kind of stuck out to me is you talked about people, right? You know, culture is people. So one of the questions that we had already kind of pre-developed for you kind of relates to that. You know, personality differences can arrive between different cultural upbringings. How would you recommend identifying the differences between, you know, just different cultural upbringings and true bad behavior?
Yeah, so I think those things are not related. Difference in culture doesn't mean bad. And if we're of the mindset that that is a thing, then we'll have to evaluate, you know, our outlook, right? So different doesn't mean bad. Bad is bad no matter what your upbringing. If you're from Tennessee like myself, or you're from New York City, there shouldn't be any daylight between bad and good. Maybe different ways we do things, you know, a stoop versus a porch, you know, a pop versus a cola. But those difference in culture doesn't mean one is bad, one is good. What's the second part of your question?
It was just distinguishing differences between bad behavior and cultural upbringings. But that does kind of lead into you know, a follow-up question in regards to culture and people. When policy when it limits the inclusion of cultures, based on your experience, what would you recommend? How would you recommend tactfully addressing getting the policy changed to more align with being more culturally inclusive?
I'll offer seek to understand before being understood. So the purpose of diversity and inclusion, and obviously those are two different things. Sometimes we say it as if they're one, but diversity is different from inclusion, right? So you can have diversity by bringing X number of whatever into an organization, but that does not mean inclusion. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion, why is that important? It relates to better problem solving and mission effectiveness. And I give you an unrelated example, but it was my blind spot by being a male. When I was command chief of the Air Force Base, small Air Force base out in Texas, and the female airman was like, "Hey, Chief, one, there's no makeup selection, and two, the complexion of the makeup is only for Anglo-Saxon or white people." I was like, wow, I did not know that. Not because I didn't care about makeup, it's because I don't wear makeup. So it took someone to, you know, wear makeup to point that out to me. Obviously, we fixed that. So the point is, just by the nature of who we are, there's going to be gaps in how we think, what we see, what we look for, right? And so that's why diversity is important. So our going in premise shouldn't be that something nefarious or evil. If there's things in policy that doesn't match with cultural inclusion, we need to address those things and bring it up to higher and say, hey, this probably wasn't intended to, but this is what this policy means, and let's work through that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief. Kind of switching gears just slightly, more so with your current job, and within your bio, you talk about the need for widening the aperture for diversity and inclusion without lowering standards. And if I remember right, that was in bold letters or capitalizations. So have you found any barriers so far that inhibit being able to widen that aperture in certain areas without lowering the standard? And part two of that is, what areas have been able to be widened without reducing the standards?
Yes, there's a false myth that diversity and inclusion automatically means lowering the standards, and that's not the case. So we'll have to keep the primary principles first. So in the regards of special operations, we here special operations must be able to do the most difficult missions in the most austere conditions with the least amount of time possible, right? So there's our standards that are there. So in my opinion, as Robert Zackery, at no time should lack of qualification or lack of meeting those standards be superseded by DNI. Several reasons. the primary purpose of special operations is to get the mission done. And so if we sacrifice that while we have a special operations, two, it's not fair for those individuals who made it regardless of the color or sex. You want people on a team, and you want the rest of people on the team to know that they earned their way there, not through some other means. And so that's not fair to those individuals who have made their way to the team, who have earned their way through assessment and selection. And so when we talk about widening the aperture, we look at certain special operation teams, they recruit what's I call graybeard. You go out to areas that you're familiar with and you recruit individuals. So there's probably not a lot of Navy SEALs going to South Side Chicago recruiting Navy SEALs, right? Doesn't mean that those guys and gals there are not capable of swimming and running and carrying a lot of weight and shooting very well. It's just that we're not going to those areas. So that would be one example of widening the aperture without lowering the standards. And there's a finite difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. It's a difference in widening the aperture to get more people into a assessment and selection process versus trying to manipulate the outcome. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get more people through the pipeline, and then we'll let the cards fall where they may, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief. Just had a question come in. This wasn't one of the ones that we sent you ahead of time, but it relates into what you were talking about with focusing on our strategic level competitors. Oftentimes recruiters, especially at the tactical level, are focused on their competitors as against who can take these applicants from me. So Army, Navy, Marine Corps, even Guard Reserve. What would be your train of thought with widening that aperture and looking more so at our actual strategic level competitors instead of sister services? Because obviously you're working in that joint environment. You guys aren't, oh, well, that's a CCT, I'm a Navy SEAL, forget that guy.
Yeah, we still give each other a hard time and talk trash behind the scenes, but you know, we're still brothers and sisters. But from the recruiting, I've never been a recruiter, so I'll caveat that, I'll qualify that. I've never been a recruiter, but I say when you're competing against the other services, you have to know what the Air Force provides. And so a lot of times we have a difficult go at getting CCT, TACP, PJ applicants because when they think of jumping out of airplanes and being a badass, they think Marine Corps or Army or directly Navy SEALs because they have a huge PR presence, right? So they don't think Air Force. So as Air Force members, I know we have a recruiting service for special tactics, but I'm just using your example. As Air Force members, you have to understand the special operations mission and be able to speak to it. In addition to, you have to look the part, to be quite honest. If you have an in-shape guy who cares about fitness and he wants to go to an organization that cares about fitness, and you have two recruiters regardless of the service, one is fit, the other one is not, he's going to make assessments not based on what he see, what you say, but by what he see. So that's a piece of it as well. When it comes to members want to join the Air Force versus the Army, say not special ops, back to my original point, if you don't know what the Air Force is about, how can you give something to someone that you don't have? Right? And the kids are smart nowadays. They can tell when you're blowing smoke up their ass and feed them a line of crack. It's only so many times you can say fly, fight, win, air power, right? So can you talk to the different missions of the Air Force? Can you talk to the different aircraft and what they can do with those aircraft? And what's the significance of a C-17 versus a F-15 or F-16? And those things matter.
Perfect. And that's a perfect tee up for this next question. So in regards to the Chief of Staff's Action Order A, we're tasked with recruiting future airmen with universal skill set important to all airmen, right? So what are some universal skill sets that you find pivotal to getting after this action order?
Yeah, for me, I think grit. We also look at moral and ethics. It's kind of hard to quantify that, right? But we don't need individuals in our service that don't have a certain baseline of moral values, right? We'll look at the willingness to learn. Look at the old saying, an uncoachable kid is an unhireable adult, right? So these things are very subjective in nature. There's not a, check the box list, do you look like this and you have that? And these things are complicated. Dealing with people is always complicated. But when we start looking at attracting the right people, first we got to identify what are those attributes that we need. How do we identify that across the spectrum, and then put that in practice? That practical application is what's hard. So I don't think I answered your question because that's a very difficult one. I'm just giving an assessment of some things that could help.
Absolutely, Chief. And there's no cookie cut answer where, obviously you've got quite a bit of experience, and that's what we're kind of trying to peel apart and kind of look behind the curtain. This kind of leads into another kind of broad question, right? Heritage. Heritage is a big part of who we do. It's a part of our culture. But how does heritage, in your view, how does heritage tie into our culture where the Air Force is ever evolving?
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. When I say heritage, how far do you go back for the Air Force?
Well, our heritage, obviously 1947, but if we want to go back, I mean, we can go back to the Army Air Corps and even beyond. But just from your perspective, obviously we're in a way different place today. Chief Goldstrom was talking yesterday how he's been in the Air Force, and it seemed like 5 different Air Forces because of the culture has changed. It ebbs and flows. At one point, we're having to get rid of people. We're trying to lean the force. So with the differences in how we've evolved, how important is the heritage to our culture as it continues to evolve?
I have about 5 thoughts in my head. I try not to have a senior moment and forget as I talk through them. But first, Chief Goldstrom, he's been in for like 82 years, so he's seen the ebb and flows, for a long time. Besides that point, we shouldn't confuse culture with business practices, right? So we'll be mistaken if we think that the Air Force is not a big corporate business. We do things for the nation, don't get me wrong, but it's also a numbers game as well. So those ebbs and flows, I think, are business decisions, and they were unfortunate because we lost some good people. And then there's times where, we probably should assess some people out because they're not making the cut, but the Air Force and the DoD needs people and they stay in. So those are cyclic things that ebbs and flows through business practices. When we talk about culture, you're right, 1947. And there was a reason why the Air Force had to make a distinct break from the Army to establish their own culture, similar to the Space Force needs to do to establish their own culture. But now in 2021, I think we as airmen should not just go back to 1947, but we should look at our Army history, right? So history makes you smart, heritage makes you proud, right? So we were born from the Army Air Corps, and there are things and attributes that airmen who were in hot air balloons and other things were doing that was pre-1947 that we don't talk about. Why is that, right? So we need to look back and say, what is our true heritage and what things we can pick through? Thirdly, evolving doesn't mean lack of culture and heritage. It means adapting. So we can stay in our stick to heritage and be irrelevant, right? Well, I have those old sergeants and those old officers. Well, back in my day, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, right? Hey, Chief, that shit don't work anymore, right? So what do we need to do now? We need to evolve to the point that we are still relevant. And I'll break right there.
Perfect. And you keep teeing me up for these different ones that we already have. You talk about adapting and evolving, accelerate, change, or lose, right? So in regards to culture, especially right now with your current job, diversity and inclusion, how would you recommend accelerating change with diversity and inclusion for leaders? And then to complement that, as a follower, how should followers be complementing what the leaders need to be doing?
Okay, so your second part of your question, keep that in queue. Let's qualify the first part of your question. How so? Can you get a little bit more specific?
So we talk about accelerate, change, or lose, right? So with what we're doing right now, if we need to accelerate change as leaders, because our target audience here is senior NCOs, what, in your opinion, types of changes or what mindset do we need to be in as senior NCOs to accelerate diversity and inclusion specific changes And then for the followers listening, because obviously this is open to all of Air Force recruiting service. So we've got civilians, junior NCOs, possibly officers that could be watching this. But, for the junior NCOs watching, how would you recommend them complementing what you're telling the senior NCOs to be doing?
Okay, now I understand. I think first we must define the words that we say, kind of like before, we had to define what is culture, right? I understand the formula versus the narrative. So when we define diversity and inclusion, what is diversity? So diversity, uh, I like diversity, inclusion, belonging. I'm a simple guy from Tennessee, went to public school. So diversity is being invited to the dance, right? There's a school dance. Diversity, hey, you're invited to the dance. Inclusion is when you get to the dance, someone says, hey, you want to, come dance with me. All right. And then belonging is every once in a while they play your type of music, whatever type of music that is, right? So back to understanding what diversity and inclusion is. I think we all must educate ourselves on what those terms mean, but more importantly, why is it a necessity for the military? Um, I'm all about mission accomplishment, but there are some business practices that we can learn from. Harvard Business Review has done many studies that a diverse organization comes up with better results faster than a myopic thinking organization. There also, I think, is 28% higher profits with a diverse team than without a diverse team. And so people may say, well, we're not running a business. Absolutely not. It's more important than business. When it's time to solve the most complex problems for our nation or to figure out a way how to get in a country and out safely, or how to solve the next widget that we need to have for the Air Force or do something faster and more efficiently, who better than a diverse team that thinks differently to solve that problem? So yes, it's not business. It's more important than business. It's more important than saving money or producing or increasing profit. So back to my starting point, it's about mission accomplishment. When we talk to Special Operations Command, our command is a functional command. And for different levels of leadership here, functional command means we're across the globe. We work in every combatant command's AOR. So there are 6 geographic combatant commands. So layman's terms, the military has split their globe into 6 areas. 5 of the 6 areas are not Anglo-Saxon, which means they're not white people. Special operations, we do direct actions, force kicking in doors and putting warheads on foreheads, but we also operate in clandestine and covert options. What does that mean? Chief Zackery will not be in downtown Moscow trying to blend in as a Russian. It won't work. Neither will Sergeant Parson be in Botswana or Colombia or China trying to blend in as a person from that location. So therefore, that's a clear example of why we need diversity within our force, just from the optics piece, but also from the how we think about things piece. Part 2 of that is we must have complex understanding of culture and languages. A lot of our special operators speaks 2, 3, 4 languages. Me understanding and speaking Tennessee Spanish is not the same as a Spanish speaker from Venezuela who speaks it from a native tongue, but also understands the cultural complexities of the language and the culture. Again, back to the diversity piece. So is diversity, D&I a moral thing? Yes. Is it something we should do as a social experiment? Absolutely. But it's also a mission imperative for winning and fighting and competing for the nation.
Outstanding. And a recurring theme for anyone who's been following this whole PES, education has been a huge factor. Chief Zackery's talking about it right now. It started with our command chief yesterday, talking about educating yourself. So if you're not picking up on that, you should be picking up on that. Educate yourself. You've had to repeat this a couple of times, so I'm going to reword some of these questions so that you're not repeating yourself when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because we kind of encapsulated it that way with the questions. So with this next one, what have you experienced where you've been invited to the dance, but maybe not asked to come dance? And how did you overcome that to accomplish the mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the answer to that is personality dependent, right? So we all are different, obviously, and we're going to handle situations differently based on our experience, our confidence in ourselves, our environment, and that's each individual choice. Um, there is a thought out there that once, and I use my experience, once a special operator makes it through assessment selection, that hey, they're good to go and they're a part of the team. And I say 95%, that's true, but there's 5% where it's not true. So as a young airman in TAC-P, there's been times where I have been discriminated against either overtly or had microaggression against me because I'm Black, right? And I use that term very cautiously. You know, never I say, well, it was because I'm Black. No, I think long and hard before I say that. You know, and so it gets to a point where me personally, I confronted it with the individual, like overtly. Maybe not the right way at the time, but this is years ago. But you know, also to physical confrontation, right? So the point and the reason why I care so much about DNI, no airman should have to go through that. Environment matters. And I usually talk to a audience who may not understand or agree with DNI, but I start off with the following question. How many people here live on a part of town where the houses are more expensive than a different part of town? Why not get the house for $200,000 while you get the house for $450,000? Just a place to live, right? How many people here have paid for private school and sometimes half the audience pay, raise their hand. So why pay for private school when public school is free? Or why move to this district or drive 20 miles a day for your kid to go to this school versus the school that's right next door to you? And I'll give them an answer because the environment matters. So in our personal life, why do we vote with our dollars, with our miles that we drive, with the house that we buy, and say environment matters, but then we come to work and tell airmen that environment doesn't matter? Doesn't make sense, right? So as far as back to your question previously, how as leaders and followers help understand DNI and how do we try to push the effort? Let's try to connect one-on-one. It must be supported by the institution, but individually we will overcome, humans not treating humans like they should, because environment does matter. So without getting on sob story about me, there's been times throughout my career where, hey, this guy has said some things to me that's not right. Or one of my teammates, a few times they had a Black person in the same organization. They've been called the N-word, and they a little bit maybe new to the unit or maybe not as tall as I am or as big as I am. And I stick up for them, right? But that leads to a divide within the organization. If you're supposed to trust these individuals with your life, but you're having problems in garrison back at home station, that's not unit cohesiveness, and that will bleed over to the battlefield. I'll take a break from there. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
No, not at all, Chief. So with the vastness of your joint environment experience, what have you learned from the other branches' cultures that you wish was implemented more across the Air Force? And what have you experienced that you're glad is not a part of Air Force culture?
Well, I would say the Air Force is smarter than, no, I'm just joking. No. That's a pretty good question. I do like the longer sense of history and heritage with the other services. Like we talked about, we as Air Force started in 1947, but we have a long history, and I think other services, they are very very knowledgeable of their history, and it relates to their culture as well. Because again, I said history makes you smart, heritage makes you proud, and so they understand their pioneers. They understand their leaders, officer and enlisted. And again, anecdotally speaking, I don't think we as special enlisted members, we understand the heroes, officer enlisted throughout our Air Force that have done great things. So it's not a matter of us as a service evolving because of the need and the threat. It's a issue of us as people not knowing who we are and then we blame it on culture and changing. And those are two different things. I think we need to look inside ourselves. For the conventional side of the Army, I like that they belong to the service first and then the AFSC. You know, you go to a Marine. My father-in-law, he's a retired Marine, and you know, once Marine, always Marine, right? And I say, hey, what did you do? I was Marine. Oh, what did you do in the Marine? Okay, I did this. Versus in the Air Force, say, hey, what are you? Hey, I'm a crew chief, or hey, I'm a fire dog. We don't say, I am an airman. So we ourselves don't identify with the force, which I think other services does very well. With the exception of special ops they identify with their tribe first, then the service, and then the AFSC or MOS or rating, as the other services call it. So the SEALs, you know, they identify as being the SEAL first, and then the Navy, and then whatever they rating. Green Berets identify with being a Green Beret, even though Green Berets have, I think, about 7 different jobs on the team. But Green Beret first, then the Army, and then whatever job. Here, us in the Air Force would identify with our job, which second order effect causes us sometimes not know what the Air Force is about because we're tactically focused, not operationally and strategically oriented. I'll pause there.
That makes a lot of sense. Our career field manager was just talking earlier today, wondering why are we losing so many NCOs, E5s and E6s, that there's a gap across our Air Force. And that could be a reason why. We don't have that buy-in to the Air Force. We have the buy-in to the job. And if you just look at the job, then, oh, well, I can get more money doing the same job. You know, if I'm a client systems technician, I can go do that for Microsoft and make a lot more money, right?
Absolutely.
So I think you bring up a great point.
I'm sorry, I had a recruiter tell me, he goes, you have to keep them with you, get them with, right? So if you go to the club and you know, you're talking to a girl or whatever, and you talk how you flashy and, you know, you got all this money and all this stuff. And every time you go out, you go to, you know, Ruth Chris and Fleming's and all these high-end steakhouses. And, you know, she finds out, well, really you're a lower ranking airman and you can't sustain that. Well, what you got her with, what you need to keep her with, right? So bad analogy, but I think in the Air Force, we paint this picture of what we see on TV, you know, or, you know, all the satellites and X, Y, and Z, and this big lofty ideas versus sitting down talking with these airmen about what the Air Force is about, how you as a civilian can join the Air Force and contribute to the mission versus, hey, you get this cool job and it's all about you. Against the Air Force, it's not about them, it's about us. And that's a change, right? So you have to keep them with what you get them with. Part 2 of that is in our force, in our services, we have senior NCOs and NCOs who don't know the mission. So they may be hungry and eager to serve and to do the mission. But say, hey, don't worry about that. I need you to sweep the floor or go do this task. Or their supervisors cannot connect them to the big picture because the supervisors don't understand the big picture. So I think it's multi-layered. A lot of things is that's involved with airmen not staying.
So while you were talking about heritage, it made me think, and this is something that was posed at the AFSA convention a year and a half ago by one of our former chief master sergeants of the Air Force. How do we, now that we've gotten rid of the testing requirement for promotions, how do we ensure that we don't lose that heritage, the things that we were forced to study before? How do we ensure we don't lose that?
So I don't know the answer to that question, but I will say, from a leader and a management perspective, what we track as leaders, what we follow up on as leaders, is what people do. And so if we as a institution don't track, follow up on, ask those questions, the reality is people will cease to do those things, right? Old Army saying is, privates don't do what you expect, but they will do what you inspect, right? And that's true. So if we don't track it, and if we don't say it's important, unfortunately, people are not going to look at it. Because I will guarantee you, myself included, and I think Tony Gostrom said the same thing. The only reason why I know that, you know, the length of your jacket must be 3/4 of an inch on the heel of your thumb is because it's probably going to ask me that for promotion. I want to get promoted, right? Or that the service dress have 7 belt loops, or hey, who was the, you know, second enlisted Medal of Honor winner? I didn't look at those things because I was intuitive and I want to be all knowing. I knew that someone's going to ask me the question to get promoted. So that means it's important. So I probably should study it. So back to my original saying, if you don't expect it, people are not going to look for it.
Awesome. Great answer. Thank you, Chief. Another question from the field. In your bio, you mentioned that you have concentrated your efforts on improving the United States competitive advantage through organizational performance. In your opinion, what can we as Air Force Recruiting Service do better to facilitate those efforts?
And these are hard questions, man. What you asked Chief Goldstrom those questions. No, I'll offer back to the initial premises. You have to know the Air Force. You have to. Because you're selling, and I use the word selling not as a pejorative, not negatively, but you're selling the Air Force. So if you don't sell what you know, you're selling a dream, you're selling what you made up, right? So understand what the Air Force is about, how the airmen can contribute. I think that will lend to airmen staying in, but also have a sense of purpose. And you're bringing in the future leaders, right? One day I won't have my veterans hat on at the commissary, you know, walking around holding up the line. And it's going to be, you know, you master sergeants who are chiefs, and the airmen that you guys brought in, you know, 10 years ago, they're going to be mid-tier. And those mid-tier NCOs are going to lead and develop those brand new airmen that's probably not born right now. So it's a long-term effect. You know, don't look at it as a job that you have now. You guys you guys will make a difference, and you'll see the impact of that difference long after you guys leave recruiting. General Goldfing said something pretty, I won't say profound, but it was interesting. He said the Air Force we're fighting with now at the time, 2019, it's not his Air Force. It's the Air Force that General Jumper, for, you know, Chiefs of Staffs of the Air Force created, right? And then the force that we're providing and we're creating today in 2021, it's going to be the force that we fight with in 2035. So if you keep that long-term vision in mind, I think will serve us well. If you look at the Chinese theory, right? The Chinese are one of our competitors, or strategic competitors, also Russia, right? If you look at the Chinese, they have the 100-year plan. The president, the leaders in that country, they're not making decisions based on their next election. They're making decisions based on the whole of the Chinese people. So we're thinking for the weekend going to the club. They're thinking for 3 generations from now as far as wealth, right? Put that in strategic context. You know, we can't think about today's fight. We got to think about the 2035 fight. How will we look in 2050? That's the long-term strategic understanding we must have.
Awesome. I love it. So you're obviously, from what you told us all, most of your experience has been in the special operations world, but you did have a stint where you weren't, you know, obviously as the command chief. So from a feedback perspective, both formal and informal, how does the special operations world do it different, if at all? And is it better? Are there better techniques, or are there better ways you've seen that maybe we can adapt and learn from, so that we can take that, you know, accelerate change perspective and maybe do things in a better way? Because obviously in the special operations world, it's very tight knit, it's very focused on the mission. So we're curious to learn from that.
There's pros and cons on both sides. So obviously in the special operations, individuals have raised their hand 2 to 3 times. So raise their hand to join the military, the Air Force, raise their hand to go to an assessment selection process that's very difficult. Been invited, passed through the assessment selection, and then subsequently volunteer to go on deployments all the time, risk your life, right? So it's a meritocracy, the best of the best. So that's a good thing. Another good thing with special ops, you get fired, right? So if you're not making the cut, you're gone. So it's no, well, this and let it slide. Like, hey man, you're not making the cut. So we're very direct, very open, and that's what I like about special ops. Respectfully, we call balls and strikes, and we hold people accountable to standards. And if they're not there, we either train them to get there. So if they're unable, we'll get them there. If they're unwilling, they go do something else somewhere else. So I think those are pros of the special operations role. What I like about the conventional Air Force is it's diverse, right? So on a special ops team, mostly men. I'm usually the only black guy, if you will, for that particular team. So everyone kind of thinks the same. When I became a ops superintendent at a flying wing and then a command chief as well, we had everyone there. And that diversity of thought, not just the way we look, but the thought was refreshing. And I learned a lot from airmen because I had a very myopic view, a very myopic skill set with a small team, and seeing the big Air Force gave me appreciation to, what the other components provide and do for our soft operators downrange. So did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief. So recruiting environment is a little bit different. We don't operate on a base. We're very, oftentimes we're geographically separated units. Most of us, all if not most leaders, want to create environments that are more inclusive. Obviously, we can't control how diverse it is, because that's an AFPC thing on who we get and when we get them. But from your perspective, what would you suggest that our leaders do to not only improve the inclusivity in this geographic separated unit or situation, as well as making it authentic and organic?
All gas questions, right? VTC, get on the phone. As well as, whether it's male, female, or, different religions or different ethnicities, we also must have some grace when people ask questions and they may not ask it, quote unquote, the right way. Have some grace in that, you know what I mean? You can tell when someone's being malice and trying to be sly, versus someone's generally asked a question and maybe don't know how to answer it. We should all be approachable and allow people to ask questions, and maybe not ask them in a perfect manner, because no one's perfect, and have that dialogue, right? Seek to understand before being understood, giving people the benefit of doubt. And I always say the support for D&I or anything good has to be supported by the institution, but it's only going to be solved by the individuals, right? And so it's up to us to get to know each other, talk, connect authentically, right? And it doesn't mean you have to agree on everything either, right? Hey, why do you do it that way? Well, I do it this way because, oh, okay, I understand that. I see why. I'm still going to do it my way, but I understand why you do it your way too, right? So it's okay, as long as nothing is immoral or unethical. It's okay to disagree or see things different. Do you like Coke or Pepsi? Personal preference, right?
Absolutely. And I'm not going to answer that and get into the Coke or Pepsi's better. But obviously, you've got a very diverse background between, operations, between command chief, between the TAC-P, instructor, all the different backgrounds that you have. So what are some nuggets that you learned along the way that you like to pass? What are some of those, like, man, I wish I would have known this when I was younger?
Oh man, so I don't have a lot, and the reason being I had great senior NCOs and supervisors sit me down at a real young age and take me to task and take me to school. And luckily, I listened to them, right? And some things are superficial, some things are not. But some of the superficial things say, hey man, take pictures of everything you do. I says, why is that? I said, because half the things you're going to forget, and other things going to be so awesome, people are going to think you're lying when you tell them, right? I also say enjoy the ride. So quite often throughout my career, I've never took a job because of rank. I actually try to turn down jobs until hiring managers, hey, I don't want the job because it wasn't something I wanted to do. Now then I'm telling me to go anyway, and it worked out. But I always did things what made me happy. I was going to do 4 years and get out. I had no aspirations of being a chief. Matter of fact, I was delayed enlistment for the Marine Corps. Then Air Force recruiter said, hey, you can do that and get more money, and et cetera, in Air Force. I'm like, really? Like, yeah. And so back then you had to have a job in the Air Force before you went to special ops because the washout rate. So I signed on the line to be a F-16 crew chief. So when I washed out of TAC P, they already knew where to send me, right? But make a long story short is, I said, okay, I do 4 years and I try this out. And if I don't like it, fine, I go do something else. So I always had the mindset that anything over those 4 years is just extra gravy on the mashed potatoes. I focused on enjoying what I did. And because I enjoyed what I did, I was interested in it, and I wanted to learn it. I want to be the best at it. And when you're the best at something, the Air Force recognizes you. Wow, surprisingly, right? One of Reagan said, it's no limit to the amount of good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. So it wasn't about me trying to get the credit and my teammates. We were trying to be awesome at what we did. And those group of people, all of us, I think, made chief or command chief, So love what you do, be passionate about what you do, and it's okay to identify the great things you're doing for promotion, but don't let that be your first principle by doing things, right? Another bad analogy, I'm full of them. If you happen to give some homeless person some money because it was on your heart, you don't have to take a picture of it. But if you decide to take a picture, that's fine. But don't go into the argument and say, hey, you know what? I want to take a picture for the sole purposes of putting on Facebook. Let me give someone some money. Very slight difference, but the difference is makes all the reasoning better or worse, if that makes sense.
Going back to what you said earlier, be authentic.
That's why they catch myself a couple of times. I think I dropped 2 cuss words, so I'm doing pretty good for 54 minutes.
Yeah, you're doing great, Chief. Appreciate that. And we're hitting you with some hard stuff. Obviously, you sit at a strategic position, so we didn't want to waste your time with some things that were too easy. So try and hit you with the hard stuff.
Bring it. I'm ready.
So this next one has to do with different echelons. How important is it for us and those that we're developing to understand the differences of cultures throughout the different echelons of the DoD, flight, squadron, all the way up?
In my opinion, there should be different culture. The culture's the same. Now, what you focus on is different. The focus area or the primary areas of concern for a flight is inherently different than that of a wing, just by design, by capability, by knowledge, right? So, not to your question, but sidebar, as leaders, you should understand what your bosses are concerned about. So as a squadron chief and a squadron commander, the squadron commander, I should understand what the wing commander's priorities are. Try to anticipate what the group commander's concerns are in conjunction with what the group commander tells us that he wants us to do. And we must nestle our guidance and direction down and into the squadron based on that understanding, right? So if we understand what our boss's needs are, we understand the big picture of the Air Force, we understand the mission of the Air Force, we most definitely know how we fit in, and then we can project versus be reactive, and then also train our individuals, right? So my job as a chief is to train future chiefs. I need to bring people up, not to be a barrier. I also use my chief stripes to break down walls, right? So as a squadron chief, I need to understand the big picture so I can focus it down and in, but also listen to the people of my squadron so I can push it up and out. But I can't push it up and out and articulate why it's important if I don't speak the language of the wing or speak the language of the Air Force. And back to your question, the culture should be the same. It's just what you worry about at those different levels is the differences, or are the differences.
We'll give you a last one that kind of is a little bit easier, right? So the tone of the Air Force culture, which you said culture, obviously that doesn't change. It's culture should be the same. It's how we interact with it that's different, right? So
look, clarify. No, culture does change. Culture does change. What I'm saying is our history, our pride in our history shouldn't change. We should also evolve with the threat, evolve with the needs evolve with technology, and culture will change a little bit, but it doesn't mean we're not who we are. Right? There's some principles along the line that should stay the same. I just want to clarify that a little bit.
Yep. No, appreciate the clarification. So with that, what did you experience during your recruitment process back in '96 that you should continue even to today? I know you briefly touched on, the recruiter came to you and said, hey, we can get you some more money to do the same exact thing. But during that recruitment process, what are some things that you thought were pivotal that you would recommend recruiters to till today continue doing?
Well, my recruiter is an example of what not to do. So I'm here just by luck, if you if you will, right? So you have the fat guy in the blue smoking a cigarette outside when you walk by. That's not the best recruiting tactic right there. I'm just being open and honest, right? And so when he said, hey man, why you want to join the Marine Corps? I didn't have anything for him because I looked at him and assessed his value based on what I wanted to do. And luckily I did stop. And he said, hey man, you can do the same thing in the Air Force. I'm like, BS. Air Force, Chair Force doesn't do that. He's like, no, let me show you a tape. And it was actually like a VHS tape. He popped this tape in. I was like, oh, seeing this believing, that's pretty cool. So I stumbled in this career field. And so I would say the tactics of that particular recruiter is what not to do. And he really didn't know about TAC-P or CCT and all that. What he kind of heard, and fortunately I believed him anyway. So he is not an example of how to conduct business as a recruiter.
Okay, but there's some takeaways from that. So obviously, look the part, right? That I'm taking the opposite from what you said, right? So if your message is, hey, I would have liked to have been this, maybe look the part, have the education piece, understand the job, because he didn't know anything about what you were going to do, right?
Man, he's spoken like, are you a senior select?
No, not
Man.
yet.
Hey, Tony, he's still in the line. He churched that one out pretty well. Is that he spun
Hey,
it
I'm
around?
here. I heard him.
You heard him? All right. Yeah, he made all the positive. I'm taking notes. No, you're absolutely right, Sergeant Parson.
Okay, perfect. I just want to bring that question back and get the answer. That way people can kind of see. Okay, maybe this is, you've been in this business. What's public math? 96 to now. That's what, 25 years?
25 years.
Okay, so you've been in this business for a while. You understand kind of what it takes from the other side of it, right? So if we're wanting to see the other side and put ourselves in those shoes, what do we want to see? So just wanted to kind of put that spin on it. Lastly, we just wanted to present you with one of our coins. I'm going to present it virtually, but we'll put it in the mail for you. So I'm going to show. It's got our same logo that's kind of behind me on one side, and I'll get out of the frame, so hopefully it picks up. All right. We got our Air Force Recruiting Service logo on one side. It's in the shape of a compass, Nautilus compass, and there we go on the other side. So it will be in the mail to you. We definitely appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to us, give us that strategic level perspective. And I do want to give you some time for any closing remarks. And I know you got a hard out here shortly, so floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say, hey, thank you for allowing me to be here, to have some time to speak with you. We must step outside the comfort zone, understand that, hey, we don't have all the answers, but collectively we can come to the right answer. So don't be afraid to share your knowledge. Also be humble in what you do. And I do have a hard 1500 with the 2-star. And so I must haul butt, but thank you guys. And I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chief. We really appreciate your time. And thank you everybody for tuning in. We got another exciting day tomorrow. Let me make sure I got the time right before I give it to you. I believe we're at 10 o'clock. Yes, 10 o'clock tomorrow Central Time. We have Wired and WASM. So please tune in. If you got any questions, you can start firing them to us now, or you can just wait till during their presentation during the PES. But excellent day. Thank you to all of our presenters, Chief Daigle, Sergeant Procaccino, Chief Master Sergeant Zackery. We definitely appreciate the mentorship that we're getting during this PES. So with that, y'all have a great rest of your day. We are out for the day.